We're going to be replacing the brakes in the rear of this 2008 Acura MDX. Alright, to remove the wheel, we're going to use a 22mm socket on an impact. Alright, if your wheel happens to be stuck on the hub, what you can do is hit it to free it up. If you do that, you want to leave one lug nut on there, at least a few threads, to stop it from coming off. So ours is free. We'll remove that. And then the wheel. Alright, so we're going to remove our caliper. To do that, we have two bolts, top and bottom. They're 12mm. Go ahead and loosen them up now. We're not going to take them all the way out, just going to loosen them up. Just a little side note on the bottom bolt here, you'll need a shallow bit, not a deep socket. You won't have the room. Now that we have them both loosened up, we can take them both out. Once you get your caliper free, I'm just going to take it and roll it over to the top, out of the way and secure here. All right, so now we're going to remove our brake pads. Sometimes you can get in with just your hand and get them to come out. Sometimes, like on the back one, just use a flathead screwdriver or a pry bar and just push them out. Our caliper bracket's held in by two bolts. Here's one. Here's the other. They're 17mm. Again, a shallow socket. We'll see if we can break those free. All right. And we'll switch over to a ratchet. Now on these, just like the caliper itself, you don't want to take one of them all the way out before you take the other. Give you a little leverage. All right, now they both broke free, we can just take them right out. All right, now that we've gotten to our rotor, to remove our rotor, you should have two Phillips head screws here. If they don't come free, hit them with a little bit of penetrant. Let them sit for a few minutes. If that doesn't work, you can take a sledgehammer, a small sledgehammer, and kind of pound the area around to break the rust and corrosion free from the threads. Don't hit the studs, just the rotor. So ours are now broke free. We can set these aside. All right, now that you have your two Phillips screws out, Your rotor should come straight out. Sometimes it'll need a little help on one side. Just if you're going to use a pry bar or a flathead screwdriver, be careful not to bend your backing plate here. Just try and pull the rotor forward evenly. It should come off. So now that you have your rotor off, there's one note I want to make. On the back of your caliper bracket, between where your caliper went and the knuckle, if these two washers did not come out already, go ahead and take a small flathead screwdriver, or pick in our case, and just pop these washers off. We'll pop them off, clean them up. That way we don't lose them. We'll put them back on. All right, so before you discard your old rotor, you want to remove this rubber plug here. We're just going to use a pick tool. Try not to damage it by poking holes in it. Just use it as much as you have to, and you may actually have better luck pressing it through. So we're going to try a screwdriver, and you don't want to poke a hole in it. But pushing it through the top works. All right, so before we put on our rotor, we're going to clean up this hub surface here. I'm going to start with a wire brush. That'll allow us to get in behind these lugs and around the center section here, and then we'll move over to another tool. Once we're satisfied we've gotten in here with the wire brush, we're going to switch over to our ear tool and just a scuff pad or a scotch pad on there and clean up the rest of the flat surface. Don't use sandpaper. We're not trying to take away material, we're just trying to clean. Just going to use some brake clean, spray that down, wipe it down. You do want to have a mat or a spill mat or a drip pan down just to collect any overspray or residue. We're going to take our rotor and put it on backwards. We're going to put one lug nut to hold it so it doesn't fall off. And we're going to clean with brake clean the back side of the rotor from all the shipping greases and oils that we may have gotten on it. We'll do that now. And remember, on this vehicle, remember to clean the inside here. That's where your emergency brake will go. All right, now we'll take it off, flip it around, and do the other side. Once that's dry, take it off one last time, put a little anti-seize on the hub face, put it back together. All right, we're going to put some anti-seize on the hub face here before we put our rotor on. What we're going to do though is put a little cardboard between the hub face and our e-brake shoes. You don't want to get any anti-seize on your e-brake shoes. This is just a preventative step. All right, so now we can install our rotor. Again, what we want to do is line up the screw holes that we are using, countersunk Phillips. And we can install our Phillips back in. Just going to snug both of them up, make sure it's on even. Just going to give it one extra push just to make sure we're even both sides and tighten them down. All right, so now we can put our adjustment plug back in. Just going to set that in on one side and use a small pocket screwdriver and just push that grommet back in. All right, so here's our caliper bracket. We do have new hardware to put on, so we're going to redress this bracket and clean it up just a little bit. We're going to start with these pins. What I'm going to do is try and pull these pins out. All right, so we've pulled our boot back off the lip on our pin here. You can see all the rust, which is why this pin does not want to come out easily. Just going to try and free it up and pull outwards. And the reason we're doing this is we're going to clean this up just a little bit. And we're going to put some more grease on here, which should ultimately stop water from getting in behind the boot and create a little seal. We'll pull the other side. What we did here is just use a pick tool without damaging the boot. We're just pushing the boot away. And you can see this one must have been a little bit more greased. It's a lot cleaner than that side. So it should come out a lot easier. So we'll clean these up. What we're also going to do is remove the old hardware. Just going to use a small pick tool, get underneath here. You can use a pocket screwdriver, panel tool, whatever you have. Just pry up the old hardware. Another spot we're going to clean up is in these channels here where the hardware sat. We'll clean those up and apply some grease in there also. What we're doing here is just trying to get out any old grease. All right, so we have some brake parts cleaner still in there. So instead of putting our grease on our pins and putting them back in right now, we're just going to let that breathe and dry while we work on cleaning our caliper bracket. And if it's not dry by the time we're done, we'll just use some compressed air and dry them out. All right, so with an abrasive pad on an air tool, or a wire wheel, whatever you have, or a wire brush, we're going to clean up where the brake hardware goes. All right, so now we can reassemble the caliper bracket, put our pins back in. Before we do that, we're going to put just a little bit of brake grease on our pins, just a little dab on the end, and a little bit across the sides. You don't want too much. Just a really thin coat. And we can go ahead and reinstall our pin. Push down so the boot seats on the pin. Push it in and out a couple of times. Move on to the next. And just a little dab on the end. And a little bit on the pin itself, thin coat. Now we can move on to our brake hardware. What we're going to do in these channels here, before we put our hardware in, is again, put a little bit of grease where the hardware goes. Just a very thin coat again. You don't want too much, it'll squeeze out. This is mostly for corrosion protection. Just a little wipe to get all the excess out. All right, now we can put our hardware in. All right, so now we can take our new hardware, push it down into place. Sometimes what you'll find is the back won't want to seat up nice and tight, which is okay. I just give it a little press. If it works, it works. If not, no big deal. When the pad gets in there, that will go where it needs to. Flip it over. We'll do the other side. All right, now we're ready to go to the vehicle. All right, so before we put our bracket back on, we have these two washers that go on the inside. All right, now we can put our caliper bracket in place. And our two mounting bolts. All right, with a 17mm socket, we'll tighten these down. Just going to snug them up, and then we'll come back and torque them to spec. Torque our caliper bracket bolts to 65 foot-pounds. All right, so like our old one, we have a wear indicator on there. We're going to put our new one on. It's just going to press right on. It's going to go in this little slot here. All right, so now we can put our pads on. In the process of this, try not to get any grease or oils on the pads themselves. So put the pads on. Just going to line up the tabs. You start in the bottom. Line up and press in the top. We'll put our outside pad on. All right, because we have new pads on there versus the old pads we took off, our piston is out further than we need it to be to go over our new pads. So we're going to have to compress our piston. Before we do that, we're going to open up our bleeder valve. I'm going to take the rubber cap off of our bleeder. All right, so with the 10mm socket, we're going to crack open our bleeder screw. So when we compress our piston, fluid and pressure will come out of the bleeder screw instead of backing through your line and possibly doing damage to your ABS or braking system. Just an extra precaution. And you don't need much on the bleeder screw. This one's been in there a while, so it's giving us a little trouble. There we go. All right, now we can come in and compress our piston. Just going to use a big pair of locking pliers. You also want to be careful which way that bleeder screw is facing when you start to press this piston. Don't want it to get in your eyes. All right, slowly moving. All right, so just to get a little bit more even pressure on this piston, we're going to put an old pad between our locking pliers and piston. Now, to go any further, we have to remove that hanger and put it in a different spot. Just be very mindful of this brake hose here. You don't want to do any damage. Just going to set the pad in there in the orientation it would be in. Get your locking pliers. and compress. Put it into position. Put our 2 caliper bolts in. Just going to move that slot at the top a little bit. And now the bottom. If you look closely down here, you can see this little plate, the pin that we were greasing earlier. It's got to fit up against the tab that's there. That'll help you find your hole between the pin and the caliper bracket and the caliper. The closer you can get those together, the easier it is to find the hole. Now we'll go ahead and tighten them down. We'll snug them up and then we'll torque them to spec. All right, now we can torque down our caliper bolts, 27 foot-pounds. All right, so now that we've done brakes, we're going to go ahead and bleed our caliper. What we're going to do is gravity bleed the caliper. We're going to break this open. Quarter turn to a half turn. And we're going to let fluid come out. I'm going to let that happen for a minute or two. What that's going to do is push the air out through your system. And we can come back. We can close our bleeder. And with a rag and some brake clean, we can clean the area. And lastly, we can cover our bleeder screw with the cap. All right, we can go ahead and put our wheel back on. All right, at this point, I just like to rock the wheel. One side, get that snugged up. Rock the wheel another side, opposite, get that snugged up. And just do that until they're all pretty well snug. And we'll come back and torque them to spec. All right, now we're going to torque our lug nuts down to 94 foot-pounds. We're going to do that in a star pattern. We can start now. Here.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.